We recently reviewed the Vapor Pro 2, but in that video we talked more about how it stacks up in the general industry and how it compared to the previous Pro. Now it's time to compare the Vapor Pro 2 with the Vapor 11. We actually did do a full written review of the Vapor 11 earlier in the year. I'll leave a link in the description so you guys can check that out if you want. I guess this is a good time to mention that every time we release a video here, we've also got a full written review on our website. And remember that any product we mention in these videos, you can check out there. I also just wanted to take the time to thank you guys so much for 1,000 subscribers. We're having a ton of fun with this channel and seeing it grow is super fulfilling. Let's keep that number going up, and also remember to like the video. But anyways, let's get back to talking about these two vapors because they're actually quite a bit more different than you might expect, especially at first glance. I'm gonna compare them in terms of fit, comfort, lockdown, stability, movement, and durability. Let's get into it. The two shoes actually fit very similarly. They're both cut a little bit narrower on the lateral side, right around where the pinky toe sits, and they're both true to size in terms of length. I would really only avoid them if you have a very wide foot, but keep in mind they are a little bit more roomy than the previous Vapor Pro, which I know a lot of people absolutely loved. To put it into perspective, I have a medium to wide width foot, and I actually had to go up a half size in the previous Pro because of the super stiff plastic shank on the lateral part of that shoe. The width is actually cut pretty similar on these, but because there's no super stiff plastic shank there, the upper will definitely give a lot more after break-in. The biggest difference in fit between these two shoes is actually how the upper interacts with your foot. In pretty much every part of the Vapor Pro, there are features there that are meant to hug the upper just a little bit closer to your foot, which gives a more uniform wrap throughout. There are foam inserts here in the heel area which do a really good job of grabbing onto your heel, and then this poofier tongue is fantastic because it means you can crank down on the laces as much as you want without really worrying about lace bite too much. Also, the upper on the Pro has a slightly thicker bit of foam between this knitted material and your foot. You can't see it here, but it just does a really good job of kind of adapting to the foot and making it feel like it's in a cocoon. The Vapor 11 has a thinner upper and a more minimalist kind of design throughout. Instead of those thick foam inserts in the heel, it's definitely more barren and I guess raw, you could say, and this tongue is quite a bit thinner than the one on the Pro. There's definitely a bit more dead space between the upper and the foot on the Vapor 11, which makes it a slightly roomier fit in general, and it also affects the different levels of lockdown between the two shoes. So lockdown on the Vapor 11 definitely could be better. That minimalist design is great for letting the foot kind of move naturally within the upper, but it also makes for a little bit of slippage. Particularly in the heel section, there's definitely more movement than I would have liked, and it's just generally a more sloppy bit of lockdown than on the Pro. On the Pro, all those features that I mentioned earlier do a very good job of giving this shoe very, very good lockdown, especially in that heel cup with those foam inserts. It just has a way of kind of pulling in my heel and making me feel super locked in. It's very reminiscent of the lockdown that you got on the previous Pro and on the X and 9.5 if you guys do remember those shoes. It's not the exact same lockdown as those shoes, maybe a touch less, especially because it doesn't have that rear eyelet on the medial part of the shoe, but it is extremely close to them, and honestly, I'm the type of person that'll pass on a shoe if I feel the slightest bit of slippage, and it was more than enough for me. Also, shout out to poofy tongues. They just feel way better around the instep and are much, much better for tying the laces down hard. Both these vapors are really comfortable. The uppers both have a similar kind of level of flexibility and softness to them, so you'll feel pretty much no pressure points whatsoever, unless of course you have a very wide foot where again, you'll feel a bit of pressure on the lateral side because of that width. Describing them both as very comfortable makes it kind of hard to say which is better, but what I will say is if you do want that slightly roomier and more natural fit, go for the 11, but if you do like the idea of that foam retention material kind of locking you in and hugging you close, go for the Vapor Pro. The only major difference in comfort actually comes from the outsoles. The Vapor 11 is very rigid and firm, whereas the Vapor Pro is definitely more soft and a little bit more cushioned. Both the shoes technically have zoom units in the forefoot and heel portion of the shoe, but I only really felt that zoom on the Pro because of how rigid the outsole material is on the Vapor 11. I almost feel like it's overpowering the extra cushioning you should get from the zoom. I would almost describe the step-in sensation when you first get into a Vapor 11 as hard, although it's not really in a bad way, but if that does sound a little bit weird to you, I'd probably go for the Vapor Pro. What you do lose in step-in comfort on the Vapor 11, you definitely gain in stability. Because this sole is so rigid, it's incredibly stable. It just feels like you have more shoe under your foot and it feels rock solid. The lockdown might not be perfect, but you are standing on a sturdier platform altogether, so from a traditional stability standpoint, it is definitely better than the Vapor Pro. That being said, the Vapor Pro 2 is definitely not unstable at all. It's just a little bit less stable than the Vapor 11. Because the outsole is softer, you'll just feel it give and flex a little bit more when you're moving around and making hard cuts. cuts. That means it's not as solid feeling, but it's a sacrifice that I know a lot of people will be willing to make in exchange for that more plush ride. The Vapor Pro also has a lower stack height than the Vapor 11, so you get that slightly more grounded feel. It's a lot more kind of classic Vapor in that regard. A lot of people, like me, really like that feeling of stability you get from something that's so low to the ground, but do keep in mind that it is a little bit squishier than previous Vapors. Movement is my favorite category because it kind of combines all the previous characteristics into a qualification of how they all mesh into movement on court. The more rigid outsole on the Vapor 11 gives it a very good amount of kind of snappiness and energy return. You can definitely feel that little extra burst you get on push-off points. I know I said the Pro is softer than the 11, but it's still firmer than average, and especially with that zoom unit in the forefoot, you just feel a little bit of extra zing off push-off points, but it's not as instantaneous in its energy return as the Vapor 11. So the outsole is a little bit less responsive on the Vapor Pro 2 than on the 11, but because the upper is so much more responsive and one-to-one in its lockdown, I do have to say that I think the Vapor Pro is a more responsive and reactive shoe in general, and it also helps that the shoe is almost 50 grams lighter than the 11. It's funny because I almost feel like the uppers and the outsoles got swapped on these two shoes. The upper's more responsive on the Pro, but then the outsole's more responsive on the Vapor 11. Go figure. Also, I gotta talk about sliding because it is so important for modern movement. The Vapor 11 is one of, if not the best shoes for sliding that I've tried this year, and the Vapor Pro is not that far behind. I just think that because the outsole is a little bit softer on the Pro, and because there is this massive swoosh shaped cutout in the middle of the sole on the Vapor 11, that the Vapor 11 can just slide a little bit more effortlessly, but in terms of consistency of sliding, they are both top tier. It's interesting because I wouldn't usually associate the word durability with the Vapor name, but both of these shoes are very durable, and it's quite refreshing for a line that's had so many issues with durability in the past. Honestly, the outsoles are both almost bulletproof. I've spent a lot of time on both these shoes, and on the Vapor 11, I mean, you can barely tell that there's any wear whatsoever. There's definitely a little bit more wear on the Vapor Pro, and that's just because it's softer, so not quite as durable, but they are both elite. Between the uppers, it's not quite as close. The Vapor Pro honestly has a remarkably durable upper. Ignore that. I've been working on my ankle mobility, which means I'm getting down really low on my left ankle for the slide, which means RIP this portion of the upper, but the rubber in the forefoot, especially there where I do slide, is holding up extremely well after like a month of playing and probably close to 25 hours, which I can't say the exact same for the Vapor 11. They've put more of this really kind of cool premium looking rubber, but it's not nearly as effective as the rubber that is on the Pro. Honestly, I went through it pretty quickly here where my rear foot does hit the ground when I slide, so it's not nearly as effective as the one that's on the Pro, but fashion over function, I guess, ladies and gentlemen. Also, why is there rubber here? These shoes are hard to classify. They don't really fit into the stability support category or the lightweight speed category, but if I did have to classify them, I'd put them in the natural comfort category with a bit of a twist on the Vapor 11. Because the outsole has such great energy return and is so stable, it's kind of like a modern stability shoe that still very much prioritizes comfort. If you like the idea of such a comfortable shoe on such a solid, stable platform, the Vapor 11 could be perfect for you. The Vapor Pro 2 is much more classic Vapor, and it's the logical successor to the original Vapor Pro. It oozes that natural feel and flex, and even though it is a little bit squishier this time around, it still has that low to the ground ride that you'll love if you have used Vapors in the past. I guess at this point I've made it pretty obvious that I do like the Vapor Pro 2 a little bit more than the Vapor 11. I do prioritize lockdown over pretty much anything else in a shoe, and it's absolutely elite on the Vapor Pro 2, but honestly, they're both fantastic options. Especially the Vapor 11 is a huge improvement on the previous NXT, which honestly was just a little bit weird. Remember that you can come into the store to try on both these shoes, or you can check them out online at racketsandrenders.ca.